What's good, everybody? My guest today is Mark Feldman, a growth marketing expert, a longtime friend now in my business, which I think we met way back in 2008, Mark, which is insane. That was like 16 years ago. Holy crap.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, you were the first recruiter I worked with when you were just
Yeah.
starting out, hanging up your shingle. So I'm excited to be on the show, and I've loved watching your success.
Yeah, I'm going to finish the intro in a second, but I will say that I remember when we first met, you were at Net Prospects, which obviously got acquired by Dun and Bradstreet. And I remember when we first met, I went into your office and our knees were practically touching. That's how close we were because the office was just small. And I don't know if you were at a desk yet or what was going on. We just sort of moved into this room. And I just remember us being really close and talking about building the team over there at Net Prospects. So always a fond memory. But you are now the CEO and co-founder of Revenue Base, which is a database as a service company that powers go-to-market teams with unlimited, high-quality company and contact data, which I want to get into momentarily. So, Mark, welcome to the Goats of Growth.
I'm excited to be here, Jay.
So, tell me about the Revenue Base and what was the impetus for starting it? Give me a sense of what the problem that it solves. And obviously I just alluded to Net Prospects, which I would imagine somehow plays a role into the founding story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Net Prospects a couple years ago with my co-founder, Malenko, and it really just came out of frustration with the data vendors I was working with. And
You mean Revenue Base? You started Revenue Base a couple years ago. You said Net Prospects.
that's right. Yeah. Um, so I, so I started Revenue Base a couple years ago. That's right. And yeah, as I was saying, it came out of frustration with data companies, and just having come out of Net Prospects and helping to build a data company, I just knew a lot of the problems and how to fix them. So what Revenue Base does, we really focus on quality first, and then we save sales and marketing just tons of time building lists. So we give people their day back, and really our philosophy is you should love data.
So within that, I imagine that as a practitioner, somebody who is using data at one point, that building lists and finding contact information and somehow using it in a proper way was time consuming and to a certain extent maybe not as reliable as you would want it to have been. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's both. So I mean, everybody knows, like, if you want to get data, whether it's a contact or a list, it's a ton of work. And reps spend a third of their day doing research.
Mm,
And it's really a pain in the you know where, to do all of that. And then you spend less time building relationships and closing deals. So whenever I was a marketer and I wanted to run a campaign, like, the first thing you need is a list, and you need a targeted list. So it was always a pain to go to a data vendor, kind of download a list, and it bounces, and it's not enough data, and maybe it's not the right data. Then you put in the CRM, and it just goes in the pile and creates a mess. So that's what Revenue Base really fixes: that data as a service. You have your ops person go in, set up your filtering parameters, and then the data just pipes right into your CRM, all your workflows. So it's just right there. And then we keep it up to date for you.
and is it fair to say that, obviously, as we talked about Net Prospects many years ago, and now here we are in 2024, are other database companies still struggling with that, try to figure that out? In other words, it's still more difficult for revenue teams and sales teams to find the right information, the right data quickly, and then begin to use it. That's still a challenge for most people, huh?
Yeah, it is. And I think for the last 5 or 10 years, like, data's just been a required budget item. It's just necessary for strategy, but everybody's kind of thrown up their arms and said, you know what, it kind of is what it is. I'm going to deal with dirty data, which is really crazy when you think about it. Like, every system in your business has clean data. Your finance system, like, you could not have 20% bad records in your finance system or your HR system, you can't mess up 20% of your payroll. Like that's just insane. So like why do people just say, 20% is what it is in my CRM and I'm just going to put up with it. I think people have just gotten used to putting up with bad data.
So let me ask you this, because obviously one of the things I mentioned in the intro is you're a growth marketing expert, right? You've a number of times gone from zero to tens of millions of dollars in a short period of time, and obviously you've done that through marketing and creating demand for the products that you're selling. Once someone has the data, as a matter of fact, let's just take this podcast as a case study, Mark, right? Like the goats of growth. I have revenue base, right? Full disclosure, everybody, I do have revenue base. And I want to grow this podcast because this is a real thing, actually, exponentially, right? Like I want to grow the audience to call it Tim Ferriss level, whatever that is, right? Millions of downloads a month and what have you, right? Um, Once I have the data at my fingertips, what are the steps for somebody like me, a novice marketer, so to speak, that wants to, go from zero to tens of millions or whatever it might be? What are the steps that I should take to get there as it pertains to just even within the sphere of the data, right? I have the data. What do I do? How do I don't know, segment or messaging or what needs to happen?
Yeah. So first of all, I think you sell yourself short. You have a successful business. You are a business owner. That's like really, really hard to do. So yeah, don't sell yourself short. And you have a good service. And I know that personally. I can vouch. Say Jay's a great recruiter, helped us build a great team. But as a recruiter, you have two audiences. One is the candidates, and another is your hiring managers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you need to do first and foremost is like you're good at what you do when you get in front of somebody, but it's getting in front of the right people who have the problem that you solve. So I can just share with your audience a little bit how you use revenue base because really, quality is key, but it's also we enable you to find companies that are hiring sales. That's a data point that we have that's unique. So it helps you really spend your time wisely with the right companies, saves you all the research, and as well as anybody who's hiring like has a problem and they want to hear from you. So that's really the key thing, and then same with the candidates as well. Is just finding people who are looking for jobs and you do a great job bringing those two people together. But it's really just about, I think the mindset needs to shift because if you're reaching to the right people, you're helping them.
Mm-hmm.
You are helping them. If you are a sales leader, you are half of your compensation is upside. So the faster you can get better reps from a good recruiter, that puts money in your pocket, helps you pay the mortgage, helps you go where you want to go. So I think some of it is mind shift. I remember like before the data days, where you could just download and spray and pray, like salespeople believed in what they were selling and they were proud, and you could only get in front of a few people. So you'd use networks and trade shows, and you'd have really good conversations. So I think things have mind shift has changed because we have access to so much B2B contact data. You just spray and pray. You're annoying people, right?
Yep.
You're interrupting them, so
Yep.
they're annoyed. It's like, why do I want another cold call, another cold email? I've gotten, probably in the last 10 minutes since we started, it's probably 50 cold emails in my inbox.
Crazy.
But somebody reaches me who can solve a problem I have because they know about what I'm doing. If they know I'm hiring, if they know that I just raised funding, and I'm probably going to grow if I just bought some technology or I'm using technology, and they reach out to me and they already know some things about me, that is half the battle.
Mm.
So when I get a cold call, um, and that person has done some research ahead of time, then really like their stock is just so much higher. I'm going to listen to them. The last thing I want to do is hear somebody's random pitch, and I have no time on my calendar for that.
So
But
let-
I
mhm.
love hearing from people who have the problem myself. So I would recommend for you and anybody listening is just to put in that time, whether you use revenue based or whether you do the research yourself, is just broadcast, just get in front of people who have the problem you solve.
So let me ask you this, right? Because you just used that word broadcast, but then also there's a element of personalization that
Mhm,
goes into it. And I know just from my own desk, so to speak, that there's this concept of 10x, right? There's do everything 10x better, 10x more, and all the other stuff, right?
mhm,
I've been 10xing the quality of my outreach, I guess, if you will, and trying to be
mhm,
really personalized and saying to myself, okay, well, you know what, Jay, maybe you're not going to get out 100 messages today, but you're going to go 10 really good messages, right? It's almost the
mhm,
opposite of 10x, if you will. It's almost dividing 10x, going from 100 to 10, I guess, if you will, right? But getting really good quality out. But again, use the word broadcast. So I guess the question is that, and again, moving it back to my podcast, because I feel like my podcast can fuel the growth for everything else, right? In other words, if I do a really
mhm,
good job with the podcast, if enough people are listening to the podcast, a certain amount of listeners are going to convert into customers, let's just say, right? It's like
mhm,
podcast is the front end, if you will, of my funnel, right? Top of the funnel. In the podcast's sense, if I wanted to specifically just grow the audience, and let's say, for instance, create a newsletter, and in the newsletter, maybe every Monday, as I do anyways on Mondays, I share it on LinkedIn and let everybody know that I just interviewed Mark Feldman, right? The newsletter would essentially act as the same way. And that newsletter ultimately is to grow my email list, so that when I have something else besides the podcast, I can announce, and it's just a nice asset that I can create. That's a broadcast. When to your point, when I have a specific, say, um, outreach that I want to use for hiring managers, people who are in the position of hiring a sales leader, let's just say, that's when I should show them that I know them, if you will, right? That cliche, like I want to be
yep,
something very
mhm,
specific about that. As it pertains to the data, and let's say, for instance, I'm going to revenue base, and I found 10,000 contacts that all fit my persona, if you will, right? I know you
mhm.
guys do a really good job of archetyping personas for us. How do I like? I guess my question is that what's the approach, or what's the balance between the volume that's in front of me versus the personalization that you just outlined that I need to have? In other words, should I just be satisfied with getting out 20 of the best, or 40, or whatever it is, of the best, very personalized messages on this particular day? Or should I be like, again, because you're a revenue expert, a growth expert, or should I be like, you know what, 4,000 are going to go out by the end of this month or by the end of this week, and I know that are certainly going to convert regardless of whether they're personalized or not?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a fact that mass volume doesn't work anymore. It annoys people.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go as far as you can the opposite way. Back 10 years ago, you'd send out 20 emails, you'd get book 2 meetings off of that. Like those days are over. So I always say, like, start with really, show me you know me. Like, let's double click on that. Just start with like, I know that person, but I also like, what do they need? What do they want? What do they want to know? So I
Mm-hmm.
would start with like, know know your buyer, know your persona, but what are the top things that are going to be on their mind that have something to do with what you do? They'll ask you on those calls.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go back and look at your calls, and I spent some time in marketing for a recruiting company, like every hiring manager and every candidate wants to know salaries and they're fluctuating. And really right now we're in a just a really interesting period, early 2024, post COVID, post lots of layoffs, like salaries are all over the place. So what you could do, for example, is give them that comp, talent quality level. Can I find, is there a discount on great quality talent? Things like that. You can come right out and say, you know, you are hiring for these roles, and I would love to share with you some just recent salary data points on those and talent data points around the like senior Java developer or whatever the roles are on your team. And look at their company. If it's a small company, they probably don't hire a lot of developers. You can say, I've hired X amount in the last 2 years. I've seen the trends.
Mhm.
And, you know, if nothing else, like, let's get on a call. I'll share that with you. So right away, you know, you've shown them not only you know them, but you know something that they need and want right now. So if I would get on a call with you because I want to know that. So maybe I use you, maybe I don't, depending on, you know, all the specifics, but you're gonna get that connection. You're gonna get on that call.
Well, even with that, what you just broke down, that's a good way of actually sort of straddling the line, I guess, if you will, right? Because if I get the persona right, if I target it right, and let's say, for instance, to your point, I find a bunch of companies that may hire Java developers, but they don't hire a lot of Java developers. And let's say, for instance, I find 400 of them, let's just say, right? I
Mhm.
can, just as an example, I can be specific to that persona, but also broad in my messaging, right? In other words, because it might not, even though I'm sending it to Mark Feldman, let's just say, it could also be sending that same message to 400 other people, but it might feel like Mark Feldman is getting it. And I think that's really the trick, isn't
Right.
it? In terms of how do you actually make it so that you are, you know, you sound like you're talking to them only, but really you're talking to a lot of folks. And I think if we can get that right, there's a good balance there, I guess. But I
Yeah.
don't know. You tell me.
Yeah. That's a great point. So it's like finding that right balance between volume and quality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about creating segments. And whether you use revenue based to, let's say, target CROs at information security startups or whatever those segments are, like just like think about your market and just create a grouping where they all are going to have a similar problem. So as a startup cybersecurity, let's say CTO is going to like definitely be hiring. They're a startup, but they may have come from a big company. Maybe they were an engineer and have a really great idea and product, and this is their first startup. So you can really like target that audience. Like if you know your customer well, like what's going to be on their mind. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think if they're an early stage startup, might be a little bit nervous about working with a recruiter the first time. So maybe it's the top 10 things or, you know, the secrets of working with a recruiter or what recruiters don't tell you, just something that can give them value. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
create that segment, find that segment, like, whether you go on LinkedIn or revenue based, like, find, like, count the numbers and
Mm-hmm.
you want a big enough segment where you're going to provide something of value to them.
How do you go? Okay, so let me just zoom back out a little bit there because, you know, I'm listening to that and I go, okay, yep, that's obviously great advice and it works clearly, right? But then
Hmm.
I say to myself, well, how do you go from? And again, I'll use the podcast as an example. How do you go from say a million to 10 million? To, well, I'll use your own example, right? And a couple of times where you've gone from 0 million to $10 million or 0 million, $0 to $10 million in 3 years, or $10 million or $20 million in a very short period of time, right?
Yep.
It's like at some point um, there's a level of scale, I guess, that needs to be achieved. At
Yep.
what point? At what point is there a point where you find the right messaging and you
Hmm.
go, okay, well, this is converting enough with a small segment or a small sample. Now let's go and light a match to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Is like when you find something that's working. And I think that's where you need patience, you need grit to just try things.
Mm-hmm.
And if if you try 10 things and none of them are working, like take a step back, go take a walk, go clear your head, just hit the pause button for a couple days and think clearly, like what can I do completely different? As my boss, former boss at Net Prospects, Gary Hallowell is a great founder. He'd say like, word he uses like you Rubik's Cube it. You test and sort of iterate, and that takes time,
Mm.
like and patience and grit. And then once you find it, that groove, you'll know.
Let me ask you this. This is something I've asked a lot of people, which is how much data or how much information do you need to know, to go with confidence to be like, okay, now it's time to iterate. It's time to go in another direction. In other words, after 100 emails and the conversion rate is 2%, or after 100 emails and the
Hmm.
conversion rate is 40%, like maybe it's
Hmm.
1,000 you need. You know what I mean? Is there a particular benchmark or point of data that you should look at and say, okay, now it's time to change or it's time to fuel because it's working?
Yeah, it's probably around like 5 or 10 kind of cycles of repeats where you're like, okay, it's time to scale. But I think, I'm a data person. I co-founded a data company, but I think it comes down to gut at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to say here's the magic number, but it's in lots of industries, like if you can talk to 5 customers, if you can do something 5 times, then you're onto something. So, and I'd say just be careful where you could get some false signal. Like if let's say 2 of those times it was somebody in your network, or it was somebody who's a friend of a friend, or there's some like situation, like you have to be like honest with yourself, and don't hit the match too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
That's one advice. And like when you do, you can step into it. You can say, I'm not going to just light the whole thing on fire, but I'm going to start with 5%, 10%, just kind of work your way up. It's like an athlete.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned obviously not to strike the match too quickly, so to speak. What are some of the other, um, I guess, common mistakes or that you see people make early that can really, hurt growth or stifle growth in a certain way?
I think the biggest thing is not talking to your customer. I should say, let me rephrase that. I'd say it's not listening to your customer.
Mm.
I think sales is all about the customer.
Mm-hmm.
It is not about you. Um, you solve their problems on not just a logical level, but on an emotional level. What are they worried about?
Mm.
Like people today are risk averse, worried about making a decision, losing their job. So, like, status quo is the safe thing to do. So, you may have the best thing, you may have the best solution, but do they feel confident in themselves? Do they feel confident in making a move, really like moving forward with something, executing? Like, I think you have to know them emotionally, know your buyers, know the dynamics behind the scene. If it's a head of sales that you're selling to, they're on the line for revenue, so they take every hire so seriously.
Mm.
There's not a lot of margin for error. What do they care about? Like CEOs, boards are saying grow faster. So if you can ramp somebody, if somebody can ramp faster, they come from an industry, a similar similar company, so their learning curve is going to be shorter. Maybe they've grown a lot in their career, so you can see like they're really good at learning and growth. Like I think it's just really get to know your customer. I think where people fail today, and this is a tough market. Like there are no layups. Like those days are over. Like you have to sell. You have to solve problems, but you really have to get into the mind of your buyer emotionally as well as just logically.
You mentioned the investors want you to grow, grow, grow. Is what have you been hearing, obviously, from your perch in this environment that you just alluded to, right? Because I've been hearing a lot of profitability more so than growth these days, and I just wonder, like, how do folks balance that? Because obviously you still need to grow, or you're gonna die, so to speak, right? So growth is
Yeah,
still,
that's right.
yeah.
That's right. I think everybody's in the boat of um, we got to grow efficiently. We have to grow profitably. Like that's exactly right. So I think
Hmm.
that's a mind shift change in tech and venture-backed tech, but that's how the rest of the world operates. So it's like sort of nothing like that new. It's just kind of things are coming back to normal.
Does that mean, and maybe even from your world, I guess, does that mean investors are sort of recalibrating their own patience? In other words, like, yes, we want to grow, but okay, we'll grow. We're okay with growing slower now, as long as on the other side of that balance sheet, so to speak, the other side of that P&L, we're seeing the profitability number creep up more, even though the growth might be slowing. Like, is that?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is just like you saw a big adjustment in valuations downward.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, some companies be surprised if many companies like even have half the value they did 2 years ago.
mm-hmm.
So because of that, the exits are smaller, so the growth needs are just come down as well. So, it's all a self-fulfilling prophecy. If there's going to be a big exit, like we want to grow faster, we can pour more money in, lose more money, take more risks. So today it's about kind of growing maybe half as fast. So to do that, you can do that profitably. You need to do that profitably. There's less. You need less capital.
Yep, to do that makes sense. Ready for the rapid fire five, which I'm not sure if you knew.
Always.
All right, I'm not even sure if you knew about this,
I
but
don't know what it is, but
yeah.
I'm ready.
All
I
right,
was
cool.
born ready, Jay.
There you go. That's right. Like I say, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Real simple. 5 questions. Ask you. You give me 5 quick answers, just so people can get to know you at a little bit different level. Here we go. What motivates you?
What motivates me is the fear of losing.
Same way. Name a big goal you have right now, and when would you like to accomplish it?
Big goal is to raise great kids, and once they leave the house and are on their own, like I want to have my kids have good values and treat people well.
How old are they now?
11 and 14.
Okay, I'm right behind you. 10 and 8. Very
Wow.
cool. What's your most preferred way to learn new information to stay sharp?
I love reading and by video. So I'm a super visual person, so I like to see things visually. Also, a little bit of ADHD, so if I can read, I can just go a lot faster.
Who's your favorite character of all time?
Oh man, I would say Superman's my favorite character of all time. Why? Because I just have really, really great memories. I'm like a 80s kid, so Superman 1, 2, and 3 just have really, really, really great memories.
I love that. What's your favorite thing to do when you aren't working?
I love to travel into about 40 countries. Yeah,
Been to 40 countries?
yeah, 40
Wow,
countries.
that's
Yeah, maybe
awesome.
more now. Lost count.
That is amazing. Okay, here is a bonus question that my previous guest wanted to ask, and then I'm going to ask you to think of a question for me to ask my next guest. Okay, this
Sure.
one actually, I always forget questions people which people questions come from, but I do know this one. This one came from Kevin McShane, who's an operating partner at a private equity firm, HKW, I believe. Okay, so the question is, what is your greatest defeat, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, wow. I think my greatest defeat, I had another startup about 15 years ago in a different industry, and it failed. So I had a great, great growth run, went to 10 million in revenue in 3 years, and then kind of fell off a cliff. So what I learned, a lot of lessons from that, but I think like number one is to just really don't overestimate growth. Be conservative about growth. I think always have incredible people around you that you learn from and can grow from. So, yeah, I could spend all day with kind of lessons from things I failed at, but maybe this is a little meta, but I would say really, the biggest lesson also is to learn from your failures. Because it's like, when you fail, it's really about getting up and going to the next thing and doing that fast, but not repeating all the same mistakes you made. So I actually like heard a quote probably a couple of weeks ago, and you might have actually sent it to me, actually, or was it you posted in LinkedIn? It was like a sports coach, of I think women's volleyball, and she said, "Look, like life doesn't get any easier. You just get better at doing hard things."
Yes, I actually didn't share that with you. What's funny is that so she, at least the woman that I know of, was, and I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, but she was an assistant coach for the Celtics actually a couple of years ago, and now she's the head basketball coach, I believe, at Duke, and it's called Doing Hard Better. And I
Hmm.
love that. I actually shared that with my daughter a few months ago about that. But I love that. I love that message, right? Because it's not going to get easier, right? Like the summer training is not going to get easier. The next call is not going to get easier. It's never going to get easier. You have to do hard better, you know?
Yep,
So,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
that is fantastic. Which question now would you like for me to ask my next guest?
Sure. Yeah, a question I always love to kind of ask in interviews and just always interested in people is like when you graduated college, when you're starting your career, like looking back, what advice would you give yourself?
Love it. What advice would you give yourself looking back? For me, that would be about 5 years ago when I graduated college. I don't know about you.
Was it that long? No.
Yeah, exactly. Was it that long? For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Always a good one. Cool. I just looked it up. Kara Lawson actually was the woman's name. Does that sound familiar to you? The woman that handle hard better.
This year's has been a blur, so
Yeah,
maybe I'll
yeah,
say yes. Yeah,
sure.
that's who it was.
Well, speaking of data, how can folks reach out to you to say thank you, perhaps ask a question that I didn't necessarily ask, maybe learn more about revenue base? What's the best way to reach
Sure. Yeah. Feel free to email me, mfeldman at revenuebase.ai, and definitely check us out, revenuebase.ai. We are the data company, the data vendor that you love. You love data. And $499 a month. So really like no brainer cost, unlimited data, unlimited seats. Just want to make it easy and cost effective for you.
and make sure you put I heard you on the goats of growth in the subject line so that he will pay attention because as he mentioned he gets like 50 emails an hour or something like that, so we want to make sure this one sticks out and is you should create a folder on your thing with that subject line. I heard you on the
Yeah.
goats of growth,
Yeah,
that way
absolutely. Oh, look, I already have a couple come in.
there you go. Wow, I didn't even know this was live. That's fantastic. Mark Feldman, my good friend, thank you for being on the goats of growth.
Thank you, Jay. Great to see you again. We'll talk soon.
Goodbye, everybody. I will see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, and tell a friend because we want to grow this. Thank you. So that stops.